Okay, welcome to the launch of Lee Gowan's fabulous new novel, The Beautiful Place. I am Elizabeth Phillips. I'm the acquisitions editor with Thistledown Press, publisher of this novel. Just to begin, I'm going to do the land acknowledgement. Here in Saskatoon, we are on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and homeland of the Métis Nation. We'd also like to thank our funders who make this all possible: Sask Arts, Canada Council for the Arts, and the Government of Canada. We're also grateful to the U of T bookstore for being on board this evening. Our publicist, Jun, who's in the background making this all work smoothly. We will post a handy dandy link to the store in the chat box. So anytime, feel free to go and buy a book over there. Many reasons to read this great novel, but of course you have to know that people who buy books live longer and happier lives. We're very pleased to have Lee Gowan back with a Saskatchewan publisher. He started out here a few moons ago with Going to Cuba, which was a short story collection published by Fifth House. Lee grew up on a farm near Swift Current. He studied at the University of British Columbia, where he earned an MFA in creative writing, which I don't think he really needed, but you know, it concentrated his mind in the right direction, I guess. He's the author of 3 previous novels: Confession, The Last Cowboy, and Make Believe Love, which was shortlisted for the Trillium Award for the best book in Ontario. He's also an award-winning screenwriter and was nominated for a Gemini for his screenplay Paris or Somewhere. Many of you may know him as the program director of creative writing and business communications at the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. Lee and I have known each other for many moons. We first met, I think we were both 19, and we met in a convent. I'm not going to say any more of that because I think Lee's going to say something about that. Okay, Lee, over to you.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Liz. As Liz just said, I've known Liz for 41 years. We met in October of 1980. I was actually still 18. I turned 19 in November. Liz was 19. And we had both taken our vows, and there was some tension because we were married to the same man, but I remember the nuns at the convent. Do you remember that, Liz? They were wearing wedding rings and explaining to us that they were married to Christ. So, married to Christ. But we were actually there as visitors. It was the first writing workshop that I ever attended in Pontex, Saskatchewan. And Lorna Crozier had organized it. She was the writer in resident in Swift Current that year. And I, soon after that workshop, decided I was going to be a writer. And that led right here, I guess, eventually, the long and winding trails. But I'm so grateful to, Liz and I reconnected many times along the way, but one of the most pleasurable teaching experiences in my life, and that's saying a lot because I love to teach and have had many pleasurable teaching experiences, but I team taught with Liz at the Sage Hill's writing experience for 2 years running, the Introduction to Creative Writing. And we had it was so wonderful sitting at opposite ends of the tables, and we never agreed on anything. No, that's not true. We did, but but it was interesting for the students to hear our different perspectives on their work. I think it was a great method, the team teaching method. So. And so a year ago, Liz got in touch, and I had been working on this book for, at that point, 11 long years, and wondered if it would ever see the light of day. And she got in touch and said, I have joined Thistledown Press, and whatever happened to that book you mentioned, the sequel to As for Me and My House? I sent it off to Liz, and she has been the most wonderful of editors, just as wonderful as an editor as she is as a teacher and a writer, of course. So happy to have joined, to be returning as a Saskatchewan author after starting with Fifth House, and Caroline Walker, who is also a member of Thistledown, was a member of Fifth House at that time. So this book has all of these strange connections that have happened with it. Anyway, so pleased to get this beautiful book. Oh, it's backwards. At least that's the way I see it. I don't know if you guys are seeing it.
It looks good from here.
Okay, good. All right. I'm going to, now that I've said thank you to Liz, I will say thank you to the person who I am most thankful to, Ranjini George, Dr. Ranjini George, who is an official capacity this evening. She's going to introduce this figure that you will see in the center of the cover and on the beautiful spine of the book. Her name is Guanyin or Kuan-Yin or Quanam or Canon, and Ranjini is my co-writer of Days and Nights in Tokyo, our pilgrimage to 33 Canon temples in Tokyo, and also the author of Through My Mother's Window, Emirati Women Tell Their Stories and Recipes. And my partner in life, my wife, she's a wonderful instructor at the School of Continuing Studies as well, and a meditation instructor, not only at the School of Continuing Studies, but at Taramandala, the Buddhist monastery or Buddhist temple. I'm going to turn it over now to Ranjini George.
So welcome. I'm going to actually begin with Lee wanted the bell. You won't really hear the bell as clearly through the Zoom network, but I'm going to play it and remind you of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh's words that when you listen to the sound of the bell, it really calls you back to your true home. So I'm going to just sound the gong, and we're going to have a minute of just mindfulness before we begin this long-awaited session. So listen to the sound of the bell that calls you back to your true home. So just feeling your weight on the chair, your feet on the floor, connecting with your heart, with how you feel right now. Good, neutral, not so good. It's all good. You can think of your spine like a stack of silver coins and a silver thread holding you up from the crown of your head. So it's traditional that you set your intentions. We set our intentions for this session, that it may be of benefit, of course, to Lee and everyone else who's been part of this book, and to each one of you here for your own aspirations. And I want to transition now to the cover, this beautiful cover done by Alison Hahn. And you can see Guanyin at the center. She is the Bodhisattva of Compassion, and she has many forms. So this is one of her forms. She is the female Buddha. She has at least 33 forms. And these forms come from, you know, artistic inspirations, which I love. And here's another one where she's holding a vase. So she holds different objects, and the objects symbolize different things. And here she rides a dragon, and she holds a vase in her hand. And the Kuan Yin riding the dragon is the Kuan Yin you see on the cover of this book. And as Lee said, she has many names. She's called Canon in Japan and Quan Am in Vietnam. In Tibet, she's got a male form, Chen Rizi. The Dalai Lama is seen as an emanation of that principle. So Kuan Yin, as you know, Buddhism is not a theistic religion. So Kuan Yin is really within us. So when we contemplate and visualize this female Buddha, when we contemplate and visualize this female Buddha, we visualize the quality of compassion within our own self. So much for Kuan Yin, and I turn it over now to Thom and Lee.
Thank you, Ranjani. And I will say again, as Ranjani mentioned, thank you to Alison Hahn for the beautiful cover, the beautiful spine, I like particularly. And Kuan Yin out there on the blizzardy highway. I'm gonna, before I introduce Thom, I am going to do a short reading. I've decided to read from the very beginning. Seems like a good place to start. I feel like always when I say that, like breaking out into Julie Andrews, but anyway, I won't. I'll spare you that. November 1st, 2012. I address this to you, Mary Abraham, because you told me how you had met Jesus in a dream and walked with him to a desert well, and in another dream met Buddha under a tree by a river and sat before him and shared a bowl of rice. And being that you are the only person I know who knows gods personally, I thought you could pass along this message. Either Buddha or Christ is fine, whoever you happen to see first. You shared your divine meeting with me the first and only time we met in my office at Argyle, where I'd worked for 25 years. Marjorie, our receptionist, showed you to my door, and when she introduced you, I stood. You wore a saffron cotton salwar kameez, not a sari, you later corrected me, with matching dupatta and tiny silver buttons that plunged between your breasts. Joseph Abraham is one of your clients, you said. You did not ask. No, I'm sorry, I said, realizing that you must be Mr. Abraham's daughter, not my client. You need to talk to one of my colleagues. Marjorie, is Sid in the office? Marjorie shook her head, knowing that I already knew the answer. He's out all day. Following company protocol, we were doing our best to deflect you. In our business, it is generally advisable to avoid dealings with the family of a client, as the family interests are not well aligned with the interests of the client or of Argyle. You produced something from your bag, approached my desk, and held it up much closer to my eyes than was necessary. It was my business card. I discovered this in Mr. Abraham's things. You have met him. That's right, I have, but I'm only the sales manager. Mr. Abraham is not my personal client. You should make an appointment to talk to Sid, Mr. Hedges. Marjorie would be glad to help you. You put the card back into your bag, also saffron, but silk with silver beadwork that shimmered in the fluorescent light. You shook your head, your long black hair swaying with the motion of your frustration, and you said, I would be pleased to talk to you. I smiled and nodded. It did not appear you were prepared to leave. I did not want you to leave. I offered you a chair, and Marjorie raised her eyebrows and closed my office door. You went on to tell me how you had talked to Buddha, talked to Jesus. Wise men and women had explained to you that only a person too shallow to understand the power and the glory of dreams would fail to understand that you had really met these men. And now you had dreamed of me and wanted to talk to me. One of these men is not like the others. I am half a century old and worked the last half of my life for Sid and for Argyle. Now that they've let me go, I don't know who I am. I wake in the morning and miss the subway ride to work that I once hated more than anything. This morning, after I finished my coffee and a bowl of granola and yogurt, I went down to the cramped storage room under the stairs and shifted things until I found one of the cardboard boxes I've carried through my life's many transitions since the 1980s. I was searching for the remainders of my previous life in Saskatchewan and Vancouver. There in a banker's box were photos of Denise, my ex, and Sheena, my elder daughter, and I discovered my old journal and some of my fiction and poetry. When I dug to the bottom, I found what I was looking for. The gun my famous grandfather gave me, a Browning high power in its holster, exactly where I'd placed it so many years before. It's a 9mm, his Second World War service pistol, manufactured right here in Toronto by John Inglis and Company, and the magazine holds up to 13 shells. I also discovered a box of ammunition, at least 3 decades old. Do bullets have an expiry date? They've been stored in damp basements over the years, so perhaps I have not kept my powder dry. My grandfather taught me how to clean the weapon, but I hadn't done it in at least 20 years. I disassembled it on the basement coffee table and polished and oiled the parts with lubricant I'd bought for my hair clippers. Once I had it back together, I slid in a single shell. My cell phone rang. I set the gun down on the coffee table. My daughter, Sheena. My girl was up and calling me at 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Unusual, to say the least. I wondered if her mother had died. So I will leave it there. That is the opening, and I will now introduce Thom Vernon, who is going to talk to me about the book. Thom Vernon is a novelist, actor, teacher, and current PhD candidate. His doctoral research theorizes failure as a creative and critical instrument for creative writers and scholars. And I think that's actually a fairly prevalent theme in The Beautiful Place. Seems
like it.
It includes his 4th novel, a take on Walter Benjamin's 1930s exile years against a contemporary story of exile similar to Thom's own. A Vanier doctoral scholar, amongst other awards and fellowships. He is the author of The Drifts, published by Coach House Press in 2010. And you may also see him pop up in various film and TV reruns over the last several decades, including Seinfeld. One of the Seinfeld episodes, and Netflix just put the whole 8 seasons of Seinfeld up. So I've only caught I've never seen all of Seinfeld, so I've started binge watching that, and I'm waiting for your episode, Thom.
It'll come. It's funny because people are shocked. I'm hearing this now, and people are sharing how different the first season or 2 were. from what came after. Anyway, thank you, Lee. And thank you, Liz. Thank you, June. Thanks everybody for attending and having me and to celebrate this fantastic piece of literature that's come to us from Lee. I was really struck in your sort of talk, the opening reading there, Lee, about it kind of set me up really well. I'm going to ask you some questions about just where the book comes from kind of questions, but then also some craft questions. I'm going to be selfish. And there might be some other writers in the room that might be curious as to how you achieved this. And then some sort of, if we have time, some bigger questions. And of course, we want to leave time for questions from all of you who are attending, which would be fantastic. So I found this book, just a couple words before we get into it. I found this book arresting. I found it poignant. I found it hilarious at times, like just really funny and thought-provoking. It takes on who we are and the forces that shape us, it seems to me, even after we're gone, which is also kind of interesting and cool. Families, lovers, partners, they almost act like technologies that freeze us in a moment and that don't necessarily recede or lose force over time or place, that they seem like they kind of shapeshift and dart around and come in from the left and then from the right. They nip at the heels a lot here and haunt, which is something I'll come back to. I think that there's a elegance to what you've done here, Lee, and the narrative lines and the way you have crafted this that is a real testament and does real justice to its parent, which is of course Sinclair Ross's As for Me in My House. I was really struck at the correspondence between the two authors' work. So that is very cool. So this is a kind of a knockoff question, but I think it has to be done. This is a launch, so we've got to do it. Can you tell us about the book? What's it about, if you would?
Oh my goodness.
I know, but you got to do it. It's the first one out of the gate.
Yeah, you mean the elevator pitch?
This will be good practice. The elevator pitch. There you go. Like, what happens in the book? What's the story about?
Well, it's about, as you just heard, it's about a man named Bentley, who is the sales manager, as you just heard, of a company called Argyle. And Argyle is a cryonics company. So what they do is they freeze people to bring them back later when whatever it is that ails them the cure has been found for it, and they can be thawed out and brought back to life. And of course, such companies actually do exist, as I found out when I started researching this. So it's not. I mean, I don't know that there's one. I don't believe there's one in Toronto, but there may be one in Canada, but not that I've heard of. There's certainly in the U.S. More than one. In fact, I believe Google even has a branch that is a life. What did they call it? A life extension division.
Extending, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
They don't just focus on cryonics, but that is one thing that they're exploring. And
what's Bentley's problem in this book? Cryogenics?
Bentley's problem is that he, as you just heard, he gets fired. I mean, he has many problems. He is a man who, as you've just referred to, has tried to reinvent himself in a way that's almost like people trying to freeze themselves and then be brought back later. Mm-hmm. He has failed in his first marriage. Now he is in his second marriage. His first marriage, which was in Vancouver, now he is in his second marriage in Toronto, and he's trying to make that do his best to to succeed in that, and he is failing once again. And so over the course, through the novel, over the course of one Christmas, we watch Bentley's life unravel, I suppose would be a good way to summarize.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And it kind of ends up with that view that's on the cover, right?
Yes.
So now that it's out in the world, so thank you for that. And now that it's out in the world, what do you think it has to say to, what do you think it might say to readers in terms of, and that's a big, broad question, we'll get more specific as we go, but what is it speaking to our moment? Just big picture. I'm thinking about time, I'm thinking about history, I'm thinking about gender relations for sure in that book, aging.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the most important things that I think it tries to explore, and that as a father, Bentley's one of the things he's most obsessed with is succeeding in his relationships to his two daughters. One of his daughters is gay. So in terms of in that way, he's trying to connect with that daughter who he feels he's kind of abandoned because it's his daughter's from his first marriage. Gender relations, I guess that's a really tough question.
Is it? I'm thinking about Beth. I'm thinking about the partnerships and the dad and the daughters. I mean, they're very, very different relationships. And then with Mary Abraham, right? Like so I'm talking about just like, it seems to be to me, that was a sort of a force in the book where how Bentley is attempting to navigate generationally too, right? Daughters to spouses to grandparents. Yeah.
Well, and in some ways I'm reflecting back on the novel that Sinclair Ross is As for Me in My House, because that novel is about a problems in a marriage, a failed marriage. It's about a minister and his wife in a small prairie town, and Philip Bentley, the minister, is constantly in his office behind that closed door, and he has this terrible secret which his wife knows but nobody else in the town knows, which is that he does not believe in God even though he's the minister. He's basically doing this as a way to make money. Bentley has the same kind of relationship with his work, and his work has kind of locked him in that he gets that job with Argyle way back in Vancouver, so we see all the way into his past while he's with his first wife, he's still in that job when he's 50 years old, but the company is now going off into more lucrative streams of revenue for a cryogenics company, freezing organs, freezing embryos, whatever, freezing viruses. So the freezing bodies thing isn't working out so well. So, and that's his division. So he's failing in those ways, and therefore economically that puts pressure on his marriage. So it explores all his marriage with Beth in his second marriage in Toronto. So it does try to explore all of that as well.
All of that, yeah. So you're talking there, you're bringing up Ross's book, and I'm wondering what it was like. So now I'm kind of getting into a little bit of craft questions here. What was it like to, I don't know if you attempted to, it seems like you attempted to do justice, I don't know, as a sequel, so to speak. So what was it like to kind of manage the cross-pollination, right? Being informed by that book, and it's probably its legacy too.
Yeah, it was
kind of daring.
It's been a book that has been important to me because Ross came from Saskatchewan, and actually the town that he said most reflected the town of Horizon was the town of Abbey, which is an hour from the farm that I grew up, little weed town. When that my son Adam and I just actually visited this past summer while we were in Saskatchewan. It was less than 500 people. We barely saw, I don't know that we saw one of those people while we were there actually, but we should have gone into the hotel because there were 4 or 5 trucks parked in front of the hotel. But I didn't want that feeling where everyone turns and looks at you and goes, who the hell are you? So we didn't, which is a feeling that you get from that book, As for Me and My House. It was Ed Carson who said to me, as I was beginning to write something after my last novel, Confession, was published, I began to write, I didn't know what. In fact, I was calling it something at first. I was just writing down scenes, what you sometimes do when you start a novel. And Ed Carson, who was my mentor and my boss at the School of Continuing Studies, said to me, you know, you should write a sequel to As for Me and My House. And I thought, that would be interesting to try. But if I want to do it, I want to do it in a way that no one would possibly predict. And that's where I liked the way of, at the same time, being really truthful to, as you say, to Ross's book, but also really stretching it to the point where we have the sort of quintessential prairie novel, Dust Bowl novel, turn into still a very domestic, but also a novel with elements of science fiction in it. So really trying to stretch the genre in that way.
Yeah.
But at the same time, still try to stay true to that central character, because Philip Bentley, who is in the original novel, is a major character in this novel. You also, Mrs. Bentley is also in it in a much smaller way, but Philip Bentley is really one of my favorite characters in the book.
Yeah, it's a fantastic character. So I don't know, I guess I'll ask about Philip then. Can you tell us a little bit about the humor and the hilarity that, how do I say this? It comes from a very sincere place, shall we say, in this book, it seems to me.
Yeah.
But it's like, he's very funny, but he's earned it.
Well, that's good to hear. If I do, I think one of the things that's happened more than once in my books is that I write these old men who are quite funny, like old Sam in The Last Cowboy, and that happened again with Philip Bentley. I could hear him and I could see him so clearly, and a part of my some credit must go to Keith Fraser's memoir about Sinclair Ross, because Keith Fraser wrote a memoir of Sinclair Ross called As for Me and My Body, which was published by ECW Press. And when I read that book, I discovered that Ross had lived, I mentioned before that he, for a time, lived in a small town 60 miles from the farm I grew up. Well, when I moved to Vancouver in 1985, Ross lived on the same street, Comox Street. I lived just south of Denman, and Sinclair Ross lived right up by Stanley Park, right at the edge of Stanley Park. And so when that was the other thing that really made the novel start to take flight in my mind, was this realizing that when I was walking down the streets of Vancouver at that time, I might have met this man who I considered in some ways my literary grandfather. And so then I began to imagine when I started to envision doing a sequel to As For Me and My House, I imagined Bentley, the grandson, meeting his grandfather on the streets of Vancouver in the same way. And when he goes, I mean, partly the reason he goes there, of course, is to search for his grandfather, but he's never met him before. So when they meet, it's quite abrupt meeting in a coffee shop.
Yeah, that's a fantastic scene. So I guess kind of sticking with Philip, but also moving, this is kind of a craft question, but kind of a bigger question too, to sort of transition there. Thank you for all that. So I want to know about the doubles and the repetitions and the triples that are all throughout the book, which they each, like the people in this book are haunted, specifically Philip and Bentley, but even the grandmother, you know, who's in Ross's book and in your book, people are being haunted here. You know, Beth and Bentley are haunted by the twin that didn't make it, Sheena's twin, right? And so there's these sort of triads of like Beth, Denise, Mary Abraham, Sheena, the twin that didn't make it, Julia, the cryogenic self, and the living self, right? So Guanjin and Virgin Mary, like they're set up on the dashboard as doubles, right? Or as reflections, perhaps, I don't know. And that makes me think about liminal spaces, the between spaces that seem like Vancouver, Toronto and Vancouver, and there's prairies in between, right? There's the meditation space in the car, right? And there's memory. So I keep these triads, doubles, repetition seems to act like kind of like poles where the story kind of ricochets around between them. And I just wonder if you could talk about, I don't know if you're aware of craft, you must be aware of crafting the book in that way, but like, can you, what were you attempting to affect or activate with those patterns, those doubles and repetitions? What the haunting, because they seem to be being haunted.
Yeah, well,
that's a big piece of pizza, you know. So
it is, and I like the way you talk about it. I don't think I need to anymore, but no, I'll try. But yes, it's like deja vu is one of the ways it's talked about as well. That there's that sense of where Julia suddenly says, "This all happened before," and Beth and Bentley look at each other and kind of realize that it has in some weird way. And of course, the two marriages work in that way as well. The one, Bentley has really, because of his feelings of failure in failing in his first marriage and failing his elder daughter, it has set out to I guess perfect or somehow correct this with his second marriage, and perhaps by so self-consciously trying so hard to do that has probably doomed it in some way. But the cryonics itself is, as you say, is, I mean, somebody trying to freeze themselves so that they can bring themselves back in with some kind of immortality later, all of which is a reflection of maybe what we're trying to do when we write, that we freeze that past self in order for it to be carried forward to the future. It's one of the ways. It's another way that we strive for some sort of immortality through fixing our words to a page. So
like getting purchase for a moment you know, because everything's changing, right? So to get, yeah, that's interesting. That well, you covered a couple questions there. That's great.
Snapshot.
Well done. Yeah, there you go. So there are a few moments that just really stick out to me and are just so beautifully done. And they're probably little moments, I don't know, but there's the moment in the bar where Bentley is overhearing the guy with his terminal diagnosis. And that is it's so complex, and it could be so melodramatic, which is not necessarily bad, but it is what it is. And it's so well done. It's so deftly managed that it's maybe a banal scene, I don't know, but it's as a lot of it is, but it becomes poetic to me. It's definitely read that way. And I'm just wondering, you who are the director of a writing program, what encouragement or direction could you offer to someone attempting to craft something that's so full, but really kind of banal, kind of, you know, every day? I'm also thinking about lifting, it's a bit more complicated, but lifting Philip from the freezer at the end, I also thought was just like, wow.
Well, those are two very banal, different scenes. But yeah. What could I offer? I mean, I guess
encouragement. Yeah.
The thing for the original scene, I can't say that scene. Sometimes a scene like that is inspired by something that really happened to one. That scene was just inspired by the themes of the novel, and I thought that, I mean, he's sitting there. Partly the awkwardness of that scene is that he's waiting for Beth on their first date, and she hasn't shown up yet, and he's become convinced that she's not going to show up, and he's feeling self-conscious because he's the only person at a table alone, and that's why he overhears the fellow and talking about his terminal diagnosis, and the fellow he's so startled that the fellow happens to notice him overhearing and is perhaps justifiably a little pissed off at him. So there's eavesdropping on him. So there's this tension over that, and then he goes over to apologize and brings his skills as a salesman for cryonics, because he has dealt with people who who have terminal diseases before. He brings those skills to play. So partly what I wanted to show there was him working, in a sense, in that way. Well, Beth points out that to him, well, you should have given him your card. You should have had him freeze himself. And he says, no, I wouldn't do that, because it's not his style. He'll come to us if he's interested. It wouldn't have been appropriate for me at that time to do that. And I think he's right.
Seems tactful. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, I guess that it's just sort of understanding your character well enough to listen to your character and draw them in that scene in a way that connects into all of the ways that this novel works, all of those themes of mortality and resurrection, I guess.
Yeah. And so that I'm it's kind of terrific that came to you through working the book. So kind of one of my last questions here is, what delighted you? What surprised you? What unexpected? That seemed like a really unexpected delight, that scene emerging from your work on the material. So what else Or are there other things? What excited you? What surprised you? You weren't expecting as you were writing the book. I'm sure many things, but
yeah, well, many things.
I presume you haven't come across. You haven't pulled bodies out of freezers, I presume.
No,
that's kind of cool.
No, although that did come out of my research, watching them pulling bodies out of freezers.
Wow.
When I was watching a film about a cryonics facility in Arizona, where the fellow who works there decided, well, it was too far to drive to work, so he just moved into the facility, and then you watch as they unpack a body. So that was interesting. I guess
as a writer, as a thinker guy, as a whatever. Yeah.
One of the biggest discoveries was, or surprises, was the ending, and I don't know if I want to go into that too much, but you did make reference to the road trip. That scene did not happen until the very, very last draft, and it's really the last quarter of the book that I suddenly got the idea for the road trip, and that was a delightful surprise. Driving across Canada in the middle of winter to Saskatchewan, and the strange family that is gathered in that car as they drive across the country.
That was so poignant.
Yeah. So that I'd say would be the biggest surprise, the most recent.
Well, it's so wonderful, isn't it, that we spend so long. I mean, 2009 is a couple years there, right? Even not just scribbling the whole time. If you're thinking about the thing and holding it in you, to have the end sort of pop out.
Yeah.
After all of that, that's fantastic. Yeah, lovely. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to say was that partly the reason it took that long was that it took me that long to find the beginning, and there were a lot of people who helped me find where to start this novel, because I never was getting it started in the right place. But Kim Eklund, I would like to give credit to Kim Eklund, who I worked with a lot, and who won the Toronto Book Award last week. Thank you,
yay,
for helping me to write the beginning, and then that led to the end. I don't think I could write the end until I got the beginning right.
Very cool. Well, thank you. This is lovely. Thanks for chatting. And let's see if folks, there's probably some questions in the chat. And it's such a fascinating book. So much in it. Really lovely.
Thank you, Thom. I think we could have just had you talk about it the whole time, because you did a much better job than I did.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. Very kind of you. So Liz, do you want to take this part, or do you want me to manage it? I'm happy to, or you can. I forget where we ended up with that. Oh, here's a question. So here's a question. Is the narrative voice is very strong in the excerpt you read. Is that where the novel began for you, with the voice?
Yeah, that's
a great question.
I think that's true. That I think, although it was at one point a third person voice, so it wasn't. And I then decided along the way that this should be a first person, kind of written as a journal voice, because it came from As For Me and My House, and As For Me and My House is written in the form of Mrs. Bentley's diary. So I thought it would be most, there you have another double, Thom,
yes.
that it would be the most appropriate for this novel to be Bentley's voice writing something down, which begins really as a suicide letter. And although then it becomes a very, 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 very long suicide letter. It's just an avoidance of dying, I think, in the end. So,
all right. Yeah.
But yeah, so yes, I would agree that it does begin with the voice. The voice is certainly integral, and that I often work from the ear. I think I tend to hear a voice more strongly than I'm an oral kind of writer.
Yeah. Well, this is a good. That's a good transition to another question, which are, what are some considerations, given that it's coming from another voice, another book, right? What are some considerations you want to keep in mind when writing a sequel to a book written by someone else? You were maybe a writer.
Yeah. For me, it was obviously the most important thing was to treat that book as respectfully as possible. That I love that book, and I hope that my book might bring more readers to that book. Ross himself, even though, you know, he became a very successful prairie writer, you might say. Ranjani read Ross's story, The Painted Door, when she was in India. That story is one of the most anthologized Canadian stories probably in history. But he ended up feeling like he was quoted as saying that he would have been better off collecting stamps than writing. That's how he felt about his writing career by the end of his life. So I guess I would like to pay homage to that book with my book, and at the same time create something brand new. I want to. I guess I really want to focus on the fact that we all come from, all of our writing comes from a tradition, and for me, Ross is a very important part of that tradition, because we really are trying, when we write, to make the place that we come from real for the people who live there, and to introduce that place to readers who might not be familiar with it. And that's what Ross did with the prairies. And so I'm trying to do that with Saskatchewan and Vancouver and Toronto in the same way.
Yeah. So use your superpowers to do justice to the place, to your origins. Yeah. Yeah, lovely. So you mentioned that you research cryonics. This is another question here. How do you figure how much research to do when you're working, I presume, and when it was time to stop and just write? Great question.
I guess it's time to stop and just write when your book starts sounding like a textbook or something. But it doesn't tend to be as much a problem for me, I don't think. I read everything that I could find about cryonics at the beginning, and then I stopped. And sometimes if people sent me something later on, I would of course read it. But I didn't feel like, for the most part, for most of this, beyond the cryonics aspect, I didn't feel I needed to do a lot of research, because it came out of the places that I had lived, and it came a lot out of experiences that I have had. So it's not a nonfiction book by any means.
Right. So here's a question. Were you conscious of writing the male point? I had questions about this too. Were you conscious of writing the male point of view as opposed to the point of view offered in Ross's book, which came through Mrs. Bentley?
Right. Yeah, well, I certainly very deliberately wrote it from a male point of view. It seemed to be more appropriate to my novel. I mean, I think that Ross did a wonderful job of creating Mrs. Bentley, and I find her a very real character. I have written a novel from a female point of view. My first novel, Make Believe Love, I did that. But maybe that was kind of a double that I felt I needed to do in this one. That I mean, as you said, the gender wars are a deep aspect of it. But yeah, I needed to write it from a person who is like me, a male.
Yeah.
So that's what I did.
It's interesting. I'm curious about the conversation with Mary Abraham, because the way the form of it is, you use the rhetoric of "you said."
Yeah.
That you're reporting back her speech.
Yeah.
So can you speak to that? Like, what I found interesting was that I looked through, but is there a point when he's not sure if he heard correctly or if he's remembering correctly what she said?
Is there a point where he's not sure?
Yeah, like he seems convinced that he remembers. He's he's on fire, so he's got to get it right. But I'm just very curious about that in relation to that business.
Well, no, he doesn't. He seems to. I think Bentley definitely tries to give the impression that he remembers not only what Mary Abraham says, but also what all of the characters who existed much longer ago said. But I guess that's a suspension of disbelief thing. But he as far as him addressing Mary Abraham, I liked the tension of him actually speaking. I felt that was somehow evoking the same kind of feeling that you get from the diary aspect as For Me in My House, where you feel in the position of a voyeur reading someone else's diary, because he's addressing it specifically to Mary Abraham, that puts the reader in the same kind of position of a voyeur, looking over the shoulder and hearing what he's saying to Mary Abraham.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful, again, another craft move that suspends us, that we're sort of suspended between, we're presuming he's getting it right, but then we're like, well, how do we know he's getting it right? And then his space, and he's writing it down from his own head. Yeah. And we're in the middle there, which is lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, he's documenting everything, and we do have to accept, I mean, right down to the very end of the novel where, no, I won't give that away, but
okay. Yeah, no. Yeah.
Yeah, he wants to record this, what ends up, I think, ends up becoming self-consciously a work, a created work, a work of art. He is aspiring to that.
Yeah. That's beautifully said. There is one last question, and we'll sort of wrap it up. But also, I want to hear if you have anything you want us to know we've not covered. But we'll ask this question. I'll get that from you, and then we'll. So folks are wondering about the cryonics. Was it there already as the character developed, or did it come up in the process of writing him?
It did come up in the process, but it came very, very early. It actually came up at about the same time that I decided to make it a sequel to As For Me in My House, and that this character who I was writing about was Bentley, was the grandson of Philip Bentley. It was my son who one day said to me, "Oh, I'm listening to this podcast about this cryonics corporation from the 1970s, and it's really great." And so then I took his tip and listened to the podcast about this cryonics company, and that that was what got me going. So it was the fall of 2009, I believe, when I listened to that podcast, and then I started going to Robart's library and looking for every book I could on cryonics and doing all that research we mentioned.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, there's a really nice theme there of paternity and passing down a generational knowledge, and yeah, just a real nice unity there. Through line. Anything you want us to know or about the book, about what it is speaking to?
I think we. Yeah. I don't know. I'm feeling pretty good.
You ready to go?
I think I've covered all the bases that I need to. My head is just kind of mush at this point, anyway.
Well done. Yes, I thank you for answering all these questions, and I'm going to pass it back over.
Thank you, Thom.
Liz.
Thank you, Thom.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Thom. Boy, great questions. Terrific interviewer. You should have your own TV show. and thanks to Ranjini for the great little Kuan Yin intro, and thanks to Lee for that great conversation. And thanks to everyone for coming. I think this has been a really lovely evening. I think that's
what I wanted to say, Liz. I forgot to say that. I was going to say that at the beginning. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, family. Thank you, friends. Thank you, colleagues, for being here.
Yeah. I really enjoyed that conversation. I was all sorts of, I know this novel pretty well, and all sorts of stuff came up that I hadn't really thought about it. That's, and that's a great sign of a really rich novel. So thank God we didn't stay in the convent and, you married narrative instead of Jesus.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
So many ways.
Congratulations.
Okay, yes. A nice round of virtual applause, and we'll see you all somewhere in real life someday, I hope.